The stranger arrived at Willa Jarrett's ranch on a gray afternoon when the wind smelled of coming snow, leading a tired horse and carrying a sword worn smooth at the hilt. And she knew before he spoke that he was the kind of man who had forgotten how to want anything for himself. She stood on the porch of her low timber house, wiping her hands on her work apron, watching him approach the fence line. He was tall but not unusually so, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that did not quite meet hers when he stopped 20 paces out. His clothes were clean but patched in several places. The sword hung at his hip with the ease of long familiarity. "I heard in town you were looking for someone," he said. His voice was quiet, roughened by disuse. Willa crossed her arms. She was an orc woman of 32 years, green-skinned and broad-hipped, her figure soft in the way of someone who had prospered through shrewdness rather than labor. Her tusks were small and neat, barely visible when she kept her mouth closed. She had built this ranch from a homestead claim and 2 breeding cows, and now her herd numbered over 200 head spread across the valley pastures. She did not frighten easily. "I am looking for someone," she said. "Someone who can handle trouble if it comes looking for me." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that comes after dark and cuts fences. The kind that ran off 30 head last month and left one of my hands with a broken arm when he tried to stop them." The stranger nodded slowly. His gaze traveled past her to the barn, the bunkhouse, the corrals where her cattle stood in the autumn chill. "How many hands do you employ?" "4, but 2 are boys barely old enough to shave. One is past 60. The 4th is good with stock but no fighter." She studied him. "Can you use that sword, or is it just for show?" "I can use it." "Have you killed men before?" He met her eyes then, and she saw something ancient and tired in them. "Yes." The wind gusted between them, pulling at her skirts and his coat. Willa made her decision the way she made all decisions, quickly and without second-guessing. "Wages are 2 silver a week, plus board and a bed in the bunkhouse. You will ride the property at night, guard the stock, and come if I call. You will not drink, you will not gamble with my hands, and you will not cause trouble in town. Do you agree?" "I agree." "What is your name?" The stranger hesitated. For a moment she thought he would not answer, but finally he said, "Call me Thorne." She knew it was not his real name, but she also knew better than to press. "Thorne, then. I am Willa Jarrett. You can stable your horse and then find Brennan in the bunkhouse. He is the old one. He will show you where things are." Thorne nodded and led his horse toward the barn. Willa watched him go, noting the way he moved with careful economy, as though he had learned long ago not to waste effort on unnecessary motion. He walked like a man who had been walking for a very long time. That night, Thorne rode the fence lines under a cold moon. Willa watched from her kitchen window as his silhouette moved along the ridgeline, dark against the stars. She had always been able to judge character quickly. It was a necessary skill in business, and something in Thorne's stillness spoke of competence. But it also spoke of profound loneliness, the kind that had settled so deep it had become part of the bones. She turned away from the window and went to bed, and for the first time in weeks she slept soundly, knowing someone was watching. The rustlers did not come that week or the next. Autumn deepened into the early edges of winter. Thorne rode out each evening as the light failed and returned at dawn, his face reddened by wind, his eyes patient and alert. He spoke little. At meals he sat at the end of the table in the bunkhouse and ate quickly, then excused himself. He mended his own tack, cared for his own horse, and never asked for anything beyond his wages. Willa found herself watching him more than was strictly necessary. She would see him in the morning when he came back from his night rounds, dismounting stiffly in the gray pre-dawn, and she would feel an unexpected twist of concern. He looked so alone. Even among her hands he seemed separate, as though he existed in a space no one else could enter. On a cold morning 3 weeks after his arrival, she called to him as he was leading his horse to the barn. "Thorne, wait." He stopped and turned, his expression neutral. She walked down from the porch, her breath misting in the air. "You look half frozen. Come to the house for breakfast before you sleep." "I am fine, Miss Jarrett. I am sure you are. I am also sure that Brennan's cooking is not fit for a dog, and you have been eating it for 3 weeks. Come to the house." She did not wait for his answer, just turned and walked back. After a moment, she heard his boots on the gravel behind her. Inside, the kitchen was warm from the stove. Willa pointed to the table and began pulling out eggs, bacon, bread. She cooked in silence, aware of him sitting behind her, still and watchful as a cat. When she set the plate before him, he looked at it for a long moment. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You are welcome." She poured coffee for them both and sat across from him. He ate with the same careful economy he brought to everything else, not rushing but not lingering either. She sipped her coffee and studied him in the morning light. There were scars on his hands, thin white lines across the knuckles. His jaw was shadowed with stubble. He was perhaps 35, perhaps younger. It was hard to tell with men who had lived roughly. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular. Everyone is from somewhere. I have moved around." She waited, but he did not elaborate. "Do you have family?" "No. Friends?" He shook his head. "No one at all." Thorne set down his fork and looked at her directly. His eyes were gray, the color of winter sky. "Miss Jarrett, I am grateful for the work and the meal, but I am not much for talking about myself." Willa felt a pang of sadness, sharp and unexpected. "I see." He finished his breakfast in silence, then stood and carried his plate to the wash basin. "Thank you again. You can come to the house for meals if you like. There is no reason to suffer Brennan's stew every day. I do not want to impose. It is not an imposition. I am offering." Thorne studied her for a moment, and she saw something flicker in his expression, surprise, maybe, or uncertainty. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you." He left through the kitchen door, and Willa sat alone at her table, holding her coffee cup and wondering what kind of life left a man so unaccustomed to kindness. The rustlers returned on a moonless night in early December. Thorne was riding the western pasture when he heard the cattle stirring, the low, uneasy sounds they made when disturbed. He urged his horse forward, moving quietly, and saw them in the darkness, 5 men on horseback, driving a dozen head toward the broken fence line. They worked with practiced efficiency, one man cutting the wire while the others pushed the cattle through. He drew his sword slowly, letting the steel whisper free. Then he rode forward. The first man never saw him. Thorne came out of the darkness and struck him across the shoulders with the flat of his blade, knocking him from his saddle. The second man wheeled and shouted, fumbling for a pistol, but Thorne was already there, his sword tip at the man's throat. "Drop it," Thorne said. The man froze. The other 3 had abandoned the cattle and were riding hard toward him. Thorne heard the crack of a gunshot and felt the bullet pass close. He released the second man and spurred his horse forward, directly at the riders. They scattered, surprised by his aggression. He caught one across the arm as he passed, drawing blood, and heard the man's cry of pain. Then he was through them, wheeling his horse, placing himself between the rustlers and the cattle. His heart was beating hard but steady. This was familiar ground. He had done this kind of work before in other places, other lifetimes. "Go," he called to them. "Go now, or I will kill the next one." For a moment it hung in balance. Then the unwounded men grabbed their companions and rode, vanishing into the darkness. Thorne listened to the hoofbeats fading, then dismounted and walked to the man he had unhorsed. The rustler was groaning, trying to rise. "Who sent you?" Thorne asked. "Go to hell." Thorne put his boot on the man's chest, not hard but firmly. "Who sent you?" The man spat. "Your boss is sitting on land someone else wants. Tell the orc bitch to sell, or next time we will not just take cattle." Thorne felt a cold anger settle over him. "What is his name?" "I am not telling you anything." Thorne increased the pressure slightly. The man wheezed. "His name, Quinlan." "Rupert Quinlan. He is buying up the whole valley, and he does not take no for an answer." Thorne stepped back. "Get up. Ride. Tell Quinlan that if he sends men to this ranch again, they will not ride away." The rustler struggled to his feet and stumbled toward where his horse stood waiting. He pulled himself into the saddle and rode after his companions, weaving slightly. Thorne waited until he was gone, then resheathed his sword and began rounding up the scattered cattle. By the time he had them back in the pasture and mended the fence temporarily with spare wire, the sky was graying toward dawn. He rode back to the ranch house bone-tired, his hands aching from the cold. Willa was already awake. She came out onto the porch as he approached, wrapped in a heavy shawl. "I heard gunshots. They came back. I turned them away. Anyone hurt?" "One of them, not seriously." She came down the steps quickly, her eyes searching his face. "Are you hurt?" "No." "You are sure?" "I am sure." She let out a breath. "Come inside. You need to warm up." In the kitchen, she poured hot coffee and pushed the cup into his hands. He wrapped his fingers around it gratefully, feeling the heat seep into his cold skin. Willa stood watching him, her arms crossed, her face troubled. "Tell me what happened," she said. He told her, leaving nothing out. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. "Rupert Quinlan," she said finally. "I should have known. He has been trying to buy this place for 2 years. I keep refusing." "Why does he want it? The valley has good water and good grass." "He is building a cattle empire, buying up every ranch he can. Mine sits right in the middle of his holdings. I am the last one who will not sell." She looked at Thorne. "Do you think he meant the threat?" "Yes." "Then we need to be ready." Thorne set down his cup. "Miss Jarrett, I am one man. If Quinlan sends a dozen or 2 dozen, I cannot stop them. Then we will find a way to stop him before he does." She met his eyes and he saw steel in her. "I am not giving up my ranch because some land baron wants it. I built this place. It is mine." He believed her. There was a fierceness in Willa Jarrett that reminded him of the best officers he had served under, long ago in another life. She would not break easily. "Then we need a plan," he said. They sat at the kitchen table as the sun rose, working out details. Willa sent Brennan to town that afternoon to hire 2 more men, experienced ones who could handle themselves in a fight. She wrote to the frontier marshal in the territorial capital, explaining the situation and requesting assistance. And she made it clear to all her hands that they were to ride armed and stay alert. Thorne continued his night watches, but now he was joined by the new men, rotating shifts so that there were always 2 riders out. The ranch settled into a tense watchfulness, waiting for Quinlan's next move. During those weeks, Willa found herself increasingly aware of Thorne's presence. He had begun taking breakfast at the main house, as she had invited him to do, and the morning meal became a quiet ritual between them. He still spoke little, but she learned to read his silences, to see the small shifts in his expression that meant concern or approval or the faint shadow of humor. She also learned that he had almost nothing. His bedroll in the bunkhouse was thin and patched. He owned 2 shirts and 1 pair of trousers besides the ones he wore. His boots were worn through at the sole, and he had mended them with scraps of leather so many times that they were more patch than original material. It troubled her deeply. Here was a man who served her faithfully, who had risked his life for her cattle, and he lived like a beggar. One evening she cornered Brennan in the barn. "Does Thorne ever buy anything when he goes to town?" The old man shook his head. Never seen him spend a coin. He collects his wages and puts them in his saddlebag, but I do not think he ever opens it. He needs new boots. He needs a lot of things, Miss Jarrett, but he will not take charity. It is not charity if I pay him enough to afford them. Brennan gave her a long look. Begging your pardon, madam, but I do not think it is about the money. I think he just does not see himself as worth spending it on. Willa felt something twist in her chest. That is ridiculous. Maybe so, but that is how he seems to me. She thought about it all through the evening, and the next morning when Thorne came to breakfast, she had a plan. She waited until he had finished eating, then said, "I need you to ride to town today." He looked up. "Is something wrong?" "No. I need supplies, and I want someone I trust to handle the money." She handed him a list she had prepared and a leather purse heavy with coins. "Get everything on the list. If Brennan gives you a second list for the bunkhouse supplies, get that as well. And Thorne, get yourself a new pair of boots while you are there. Consider it part of the job. I cannot have my guard hobbling around in broken footwear." He looked at the purse, then at her. "Miss Jarrett, it is not a request. If you are going to work for me, you need to be properly equipped. That includes decent boots." For a moment she thought he would argue, then he nodded slowly and took the purse. "Yes, madam, and get a winter coat if you need one. The cold is only going to get worse." He rode out an hour later. Willa watched from the porch, feeling absurdly anxious. It was a simple errand, nothing more, but she found herself worrying that he might just keep riding, that he might take her money and disappear. She did not truly believe he would. Thorne was the most honest man she had ever met, but the worry gnawed at her nonetheless. He returned at dusk, his saddlebags laden with supplies. He unpacked everything carefully on the porch, checking it against the list, and handed her back the purse with the remaining coins counted out exactly. "Everything is there," he said, "and I got the boots." She could see them in the lamplight, sturdy leather, well made. He was also wearing a new coat, thick wool the color of charcoal. She felt a ridiculous surge of relief. "Good," she said. "Now you will not freeze." Something changed in his face, a softness she had not seen before. "Thank you, Miss Jarrett. You are welcome." He carried the supplies inside, and she followed, helping him put things away. In the kitchen, she heated stew and cut bread, and they ate together in comfortable silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, but inside it was warm and close. "Thorne," she said, "can I ask you something?" He looked up warily. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" He set down his spoon slowly. "I do not need taking care of. That is not what I asked." A long silence. Then a long time. How long, I do not remember. Willa felt her heart ache. Everyone needs someone to care about them. I am fine on my own. I do not doubt that you can survive on your own, but surviving is not the same as living. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping. "I should go. Thank you for the meal." "Thorne, good night, Miss Jarrett." He left before she could stop him. Willa sat alone at her table, listening to his footsteps fade across the yard. She had pushed too hard, too fast. But she could not shake the image of him as he had been that first day, tired and solitary, asking for work with the resignation of a man who expected nothing better from the world. She wanted to give him something better. She was not sure why it mattered so much, but it did. The next morning he did not come for breakfast. She waited, the food growing cold, until finally she accepted that he was avoiding her. It stung more than she expected, but that evening when she went to check the cattle in the near pasture, she found him mending the fence line. He worked methodically, replacing rotted posts and tightening wire. When he saw her, he straightened. "Miss Jarrett, you did not come to breakfast." "I had work to do." "Are you angry with me?" He looked surprised. "No." "Then why are you avoiding me?" Thorne set down his tools and wiped his hands on his trousers. The new coat fit him well, she noticed. He looked less like a drifter and more like what he was, a capable man in his prime. "I am not angry," he said, "but you make it hard." "Make what hard?" "To keep my distance." Willa stepped closer. "Why do you need to keep your distance?" "Because I am hired help, and you are my employer. Because I am a man with nothing, and you are a woman who has built something. Because I do not stay in one place, and you have roots here." He met her eyes. "Because it is easier not to want things I cannot have." The honesty of it hit her like a blow. "Who said you cannot have them? I know what I am." "What are you?" "A drifter. A sword for hire. A man who left his name behind so long ago he barely remembers what it was." "That is not all you are. It is all that matters." Willa felt frustration and tenderness warring in her chest. "Thorne, I do not care what you were. I care what you are now. And what you are now is a good man who works hard and keeps his word and has protected my home and my livelihood. That is what matters to me." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something raw and uncertain in his expression. Then he shook his head slowly. "You should not say things like that to me." "Why not?" "Because I might start to believe them." "Maybe you should." The wind moved between them, cold and sharp. Somewhere a cow lowed. Thorne picked up his tools again, his movements careful and controlled. "I will come to breakfast tomorrow," he said quietly. Willa smiled. "Good." She walked back to the house feeling as though something had shifted between them, some wall beginning to crack. She did not know where it would lead, but she found herself hoping. Winter came down hard in January, bringing snow that buried the fences and turned the ranch into a white wilderness. The work grew harder. They had to break ice on the water troughs twice a day and haul hay to the cattle in the far pastures. The cold was relentless, creeping into every seam and crack. Thorne continued his night watches, though Willa tried to insist he could take some nights off. He refused. "This is what you hired me for," he said simply. She worried about him constantly. He came back each dawn with ice in his beard and his face raw from windburn, and she would have hot coffee waiting and breakfast on the stove. They fell into a routine, a domestic rhythm that felt oddly right. He would sit at her table, warming his hands around a mug, and she would cook and ask him about the night. His answers were always brief, but she learned to hear what he did not say. He had given up trying to keep his distance. She could see it in the way he looked at her now, with something almost like wonder, as though he could not quite believe she was real. It made her chest feel tight and warm. One morning in late January, she came downstairs to find him asleep at her kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms. He must have been exhausted, unable to make it back to the bunkhouse. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching him. In sleep, he looked younger, the harsh lines of his face softened. She fetched a blanket and laid it gently over his shoulders, then went about her morning work as quietly as possible. He slept for 3 hours and woke with a start, disoriented. "Easy," she said from the stove. "You are safe." He rubbed his face. "I am sorry." "I should not have. You were exhausted. There is nothing to apologize for." He looked at the blanket on his shoulders and something shifted in his expression. "You covered me." "Of course I did." "You did not have to." "Thorne." She set down her spoon and turned to face him. "When are you going to stop being surprised that I care what happens to you?" He stood, folding the blanket with careful precision. "I do not know. I do care. Very much." He looked at her across the kitchen, and the longing in his face was so naked it made her breath catch. "I know," he said softly. "Then let me." He set the blanket on the chair and crossed the room to her. She thought he might touch her, might finally close the distance between them, but instead he stopped just short, his hands at his sides. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" "This. Let someone care. Let myself care back. I have been alone so long I do not remember how." Willa reached out and took his hand. It was rough and scarred and cold from the outdoors. You do not have to remember, you just have to try. He looked down at their joined hands, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed. What if I am not good at it? Then we will figure it out together. He lifted his eyes to hers, and in them she saw fear and hope tangled together. Why me? Because you are brave and honest and kind, even though you try to hide it. Because you have protected me and my ranch without asking for anything in return. Because when I look at you, I see a man worth knowing, worth keeping. She squeezed his hand. Because somewhere along the way I started to fall for you, and I am tired of pretending I did not. Thorne made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her to him suddenly, wrapping his arms around her, and she felt him shaking. She held him tightly, this lonely man who had forgotten what it was to be wanted, and let him take what he needed. I do not deserve you, he said against her hair. Let me decide that. They stood together in the warm kitchen while outside the world lay frozen and still. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with aching tenderness. I do not have anything to offer you, he said. No name, no family, no prospects, just myself. That is enough. Is it? Yes. He kissed her then, soft and careful as though she might break. She kissed him back, pouring into it everything she had been holding in weeks of watching him, worrying about him, wanting him. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I am falling for you too, he said. I have been since the beginning. Since the day you hired me and looked at me like I was a person instead of just a pair of hands with a sword. Willa laughed, feeling giddy and grounded at once. We are a pair, are we not? An orc woman rancher and a wandering swordsman. People will talk. Let them. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. All right then. They spent the rest of the morning together, working side by side to prepare for the day. It felt different now, charged with new meaning. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile was a promise. But their peace did not last long. 2 days later, Brennan came back from town with news. Rupert Quinlan had hired a dozen men, hard types with guns, and word was they were planning something big. The marshal had replied to Willa's letter, but he would not arrive for at least another week. There were problems in the northern territories that needed his attention first. Willa and Thorne stood together in the barn, reading the marshal's letter by lamplight. Outside, snow fell in heavy curtains. A week, Willa said. He could burn us out before then. He could. Thorne folded the letter carefully. We need to go to him first. What do you mean? We need proof that he is behind the rustling and the threats. If we can get that, we can take it to the marshal when he arrives. Quinlan will not be able to buy his way out of territorial justice. How do we get proof? We make him show his hand. We set a trap. They spent the evening planning. The trap was risky but simple. Willa would send word to Quinlan through one of the shopkeepers in town. A man she knew carried gossip back and forth for a price. She would let it be known that she was considering selling, that the constant pressure had worn her down. She would ask Quinlan to meet her at the ranch to discuss terms. He will come, Thorne said. Men like him cannot resist an easy victory. And when he comes, we make him talk, make him admit what he has done, and we have witnesses to hear it. Willa looked at him. This could go badly, I know. He might bring those men with him. I am counting on it. Thorne's voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I will be watching. If anything goes wrong, I will be there. I do not like putting you at risk. He took her hand. You are not putting me anywhere. I choose this. I choose you. The words settled over her like a benediction. She leaned in and kissed him, fierce and quick. Then we do this together. They sent the message the next day. 3 days later, Rupert Quinlan arrived at the ranch in a fine carriage, accompanied by 6 armed men. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, prosperous and self-satisfied, wearing a fur-lined coat and a hat with a silver band. He climbed down from the carriage and surveyed the ranch with the air of a man appraising his future property. Willa met him on the porch. She had dressed carefully, choosing her plainest dress and leaving her hair loose. She wanted to look worn down, uncertain. It was not hard to pretend the stress of the past months had left its marks. "Mr. Quinlan," she said, "thank you for coming. Miss Jarrett." He climbed the steps heavily. "I was pleased to receive your message. I had hoped you might see reason." "May we speak inside?" "Of course." She led him into the house, aware of his men fanning out in the yard. They were watching the barn, the bunkhouse, the corrals. One of them had a rifle across his saddle. She kept her expression neutral. In the parlor, she offered Quinlan a seat and poured him coffee. He accepted it with the air of a man conferring a favor. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I will not waste your time," she said. "This has been a hard winter and I am tired. The trouble with rustlers, the threats I cannot keep fighting." Quinlan's eyes gleamed. "I am sorry to hear you have had trouble. It is a dangerous country. A woman alone is vulnerable." "Yes," she met his eyes. "It is strange, is it not? The rustlers came just after you made your last offer on the ranch. Coincidence, I am sure." "Is it, Miss Jarrett? I do not know what you are implying, but I assure you I have nothing to do with your difficulties. I am simply a businessman who saw an opportunity." Willa leaned forward. "Then why did the man my guard caught last month tell him you sent him? Why did he say you are buying up the valley and do not take no for an answer?" Quinlan's expression hardened. "If someone is spreading lies about me, they are not lies." "You have no proof." "No," Willa said, "but I will." Understanding dawned in Quinlan's face. This was a trap. "Yes," he stood, his bulk filling the small room. "You are making a mistake, Miss Jarrett, a very serious mistake." "I do not think so. You are alone here. My men are outside. Your ranch hands are nowhere to be seen. Whatever you think you can accomplish, it will not work. She is not alone." Thorne stepped into the room from the hallway. He must have been there the entire time, listening. His sword was drawn. Behind him, Willa could see Brennan and the other ranch hands, all armed. Quinlan's face purpled. "This is assault. You are threatening me in my own, your own what?" Thorne said. "This is not your ranch. Not yet. My men are currently being entertained by the deputy marshal and his men. They rode in from the North Road about 10 minutes ago. I suspect they are all having a very interesting conversation right now." Willa watched the color drain from Quinlan's face. They had gambled that Quinlan would bring his hired guns with him, and that the deputy marshal who had arrived early thanks to a fast horse and good weather would be able to intercept them. It had worked. "You planned this," Quinlan said. "We did." Willa stood. "And you just admitted in front of witnesses that you knew about the rustling and the threats. The deputy marshal will be very interested to hear about that." Quinlan looked from her to Thorne to the men behind them. His shoulders sagged. "You are ruining me. You tried to ruin me first. You terrorized my people, stole my cattle, and tried to drive me off my own land. Did you think I would just roll over? I made you a fair offer. And I refused it. That should have been the end." Quinlan's hands clenched. For a moment, Willa thought he might try to fight, but then the door opened and the deputy marshal walked in, a lean man with a badge pinned to his coat and a pistol on his hip. "Mr. Quinlan," the deputy said, "I think you and I need to have a talk." They took Quinlan away in the carriage he had arrived in, his hands bound. His men were arrested as well, charged with cattle theft and assault. The deputy marshal took statements from everyone on the ranch, carefully writing down each detail. When he finished, he tipped his hat to Willa. "You have got a good head on your shoulders, madam, and a good man watching your back." He glanced at Thorne, who stood silent and still by the porch rail. "The territory needs more people like you both." When the lawmen and their prisoners were gone, the ranch settled into an exhausted quiet. Willa stood in the yard, feeling the weight of the past months lift from her shoulders. It was over. Quinlan was caught, his men arrested. The ranch was safe. Thorne came to stand beside her. "You did well. We did well. What will you do now?" She looked at him, this man who had come to her as a stranger and stayed to become something far more. "I suppose I will keep ranching. It is what I know. Alone. That depends." "On what?" Willa took a breath. She had not planned to do this now, had thought she would wait, but the words came anyway. "On whether you want to stay. Not as my bodyguard, I do not need that anymore, but as my partner, in the ranch and in everything else." Thorne went very still. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything. I still do not have anything to offer you." "Yes, you do. You have yourself. That is all I want." He turned to face her fully, and she saw everything in his eyes, hope and fear and a love so deep it made her heart ache. "I do not deserve you," he said again. "Stop saying that. I am not some prize you have to earn. I am just a woman who wants to be with you. Is that what you want?" "Yes." His voice was rough. "God, yes." She stepped into his arms and kissed him there in the cold yard under the gray sky. Around them the ranch breathed and settled, her home, her life's work. And now his too, if he would take it. When they pulled apart, she said, "We will need to make it legal. A partnership agreement." "Is that what you want? A business arrangement?" "No, I want you. But I also want you to feel secure. I want you to know that this is your home, that you have a right to be here, that you have roots again." Thorne cupped her face in his hands. "I do not need a piece of paper for that. I just need you. Then you have me." They stood together as the first stars came out, and Willa felt a contentment she had not known she was missing. She had built this ranch with her own hands, carved a place for herself in this hard country. But now, for the first time, she did not have to stand alone. The winter eased slowly into spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass beneath, and then the grass greened and the trees budded and the world came back to life. Thorne moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse to the main house, taking the room next to Willa's. It was a small thing, but it felt momentous. They worked together through the spring, mending fences and preparing for calving season. He was a quick learner, picking up the rhythms of ranch work with the same focused competence he brought to everything. She found herself relying on him in ways that surprised her, not just for his strength but for his judgment. He saw things she missed, thought of solutions she had not considered. He also began to talk more. Not a flood, but a slow thawing. He told her about his youth in a small village in the east, about the war that had come through and taken everything. He told her about the years afterward, drifting from place to place, selling his sword and his silence. He told her about the day he had arrived at her ranch, how he had been ready to keep riding, to disappear into the mountains and never come back. But then he had seen her standing on the porch, and something had stopped him. "You looked so certain," he said. "Like you knew exactly who you were and where you belonged. I had not felt that in so long. I wanted to stay just to be near it." They were sitting on the porch in the warm spring evening, watching the sun go down. Willa leaned against his shoulder. "I am glad you stayed. So am I." In May, the marshal came through to let them know that Rupert Quinlan had been tried and convicted. He had been sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison and fined heavily. His land holdings were being broken up and sold. It was a fitting end. "You have made a lot of people in the valley very happy," the marshal told them. "Quinlan had his boot on a lot of necks. Now they can breathe again." After he left, Willa turned to Thorne. "We did that. You did that. I just helped." "No, we did it together." He smiled, that rare, warm smile that still took her breath away. Together, then. The calves came in June, 20 healthy births that brought the herd up to its highest number yet. They spent long days in the pastures, checking on the new mothers, making sure the calves were nursing properly. It was exhausting work, but good work, the kind that left you tired and satisfied at the end of the day. On a bright afternoon in late June, Willa stood in the corral watching Thorne work with one of the new calves. The calf had been orphaned when its mother died in labor, and Thorne had taken on the job of bottle feeding it. He knelt in the dust, patient and gentle, coaxing the calf to drink. His new shirt was already filthy, his hair falling into his eyes. He looked nothing like the gaunt, silent man who had arrived last autumn. He looked happy. Brennan came to stand beside her, leaning on the fence. The old man watched Thorne for a moment, then said, "You have done a good thing, Miss Jarrett." "What do you mean?" Giving him a place. "A reason to stay. I have seen a lot of men like him over the years, good men who got lost along the way. Most of them never find their way back, but he did because you showed him how." Willa felt her throat tighten. He saved himself. I just gave him the space to do it. That is all any of us need sometimes, the space to heal. They watched as the calf finished the bottle and Thorne stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. He caught Willa's eye and waved, and she waved back, her chest full of warmth. That evening after dinner, Thorne asked her to walk with him. They followed the path down to the creek, where the water ran quick and cold over smooth stones. The willows hung low over the banks, their leaves rustling in the breeze. It was a place Willa loved, peaceful and removed from the work of the ranch. Thorne stopped at the water's edge and turned to face her. He looked nervous, his hands shoved in his pockets. "What is it?" she asked. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what you said, about making this legal, about partnership." "Yes, I think we should. Not just for the ranch, but for everything." He took a breath. "I want to marry you, Willa, if you will have me." Her heart leaped. "Are you proposing?" "I am trying to. I am not sure I am doing it right." She laughed, a bright sound in the quiet evening. "You are doing fine." "Is that a yes?" "Yes. Yes. Of course, yes." He pulled her to him, lifting her off her feet and spun her around. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him, tasting laughter and joy and the promise of a future she had not dared to imagine. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring," he said. "I do not need a ring. I do not have much of anything, really. You have you. That is enough." He rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I was afraid. I love you too, and you do not have to be afraid anymore." They stood together by the creek as the light faded, making plans. They would marry at the ranch, a simple ceremony with just the hands and a few neighbors. They would merge their lives fully, no more separate rooms or hesitation. They would face the future together, whatever it brought. And then Thorne told her something he had been holding back, something he had not shared with anyone in years. "My name," he said quietly, "my real name, it is Tobias, Tobias Quinn." Willa looked up at him, understanding what it meant that he was giving this to her. A name was identity, history, vulnerability. He had hidden his for so long, and now he was offering it to her freely. "Tobias," she said, testing it, "I like it. I have not used it in almost 10 years. I left it behind when I left my old life. Do you want to use it again?" He thought for a moment. "Yes, I think I do. I think it is time to stop running from who I was. Then Tobias it is." She took his hand. "Tobias Quinn and Willa Jarrett, we will make a good team. We already do." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that night Willa lay in bed listening to him move around in the next room, thinking about the future. They would marry, work the ranch together, build something lasting. She had always been strong alone, but the idea of being strong with someone else was intoxicating. She had not known she was lonely until he arrived. Now she could not imagine going back to that solitary life. They married in July, on a hot afternoon with the sky stretched blue and endless overhead. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a traveling preacher who happened through the valley. Willa wore her best dress, pale green cotton with lace at the collar, and Tobias wore new trousers and a white shirt she had bought him in town. They stood together in the yard with the ranch spread around them, their home and livelihood. When the preacher pronounced them married, Tobias kissed her softly, his hands steady on her waist. The hands and neighbors cheered, and Brennan produced a fiddle from somewhere and began to play. They danced in the dust, ate a simple meal of roasted beef and fresh bread, and drank toasts to the future. As the party wound down and the guests drifted away, Willa and Tobias stood together on the porch, watching the stars come out. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" he asked, incredibly. "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "I want to make you happy for the rest of our lives. You already do." They went inside together, and that night they truly became husband and wife in the fullest sense. It was tender and hesitant and perfect, both of them learning each other, giving and taking in equal measure. Afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Tobias held her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For seeing me. For caring. For giving me a reason to stay." Willa turned in his arms, finding his face in the dark. "You gave me something too. You reminded me that I did not have to do everything alone, that letting someone in was not weakness. We are good for each other. We are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Willa woke in the morning to find him still there, real and solid, and hers, she felt a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The summer passed in a blur of work and happiness. They expanded the herd, buying breeding stock from a neighboring ranch. They repaired the bunkhouse and hired an additional hand to help with the growing workload. They talked about the future, about where they wanted the ranch to go, what they wanted to build together. In August, Willa realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had not wanted to say anything until she was sure. When the doctor in town confirmed it, she rode home in a daze, her hand pressed to her stomach. A baby. She and Tobias were going to have a baby. She found him in the barn, mucking out stalls. He looked up when she came in, and whatever he saw in her face made him drop the shovel and come to her immediately. "What is wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. Nothing is wrong." She took his hands and placed them on her belly. "I am pregnant." He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. "You are sure?" The doctor confirmed it. "I am about 2 months along. A baby." His voice was full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, a bright sound that echoed in the barn. "Willa, I am terrified and thrilled, and I can hardly believe this is real. Yes, I am happy." He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully as though afraid he might hurt her. "Are you all right? Do you need to rest? Should you be riding?" "I am fine." The doctor said everything is healthy. "A baby," he said again. He pressed his hand to her stomach, his expression soft. "Our baby." They stood together in the dusty barn, and Willa felt the future unfold before them. A child, a family, a life built together. It was more than she had dreamed of. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Willa continued to work through the autumn, though Tobias fussed and tried to make her rest more than she wanted. When the first snow fell in November, they sat together by the fire and argued amiably about names. "If it is a boy, we should name him after your father," Tobias said. "I do not remember my father well enough to name a child after him. If it is a boy, we should name him something strong, something that means something to us." "What about Vincent?" Willa considered. "Vincent Quinn, I like it." "And if it is a girl, Eliza, after my grandmother, Eliza Quinn. Tobias smiled. That is beautiful. They prepared the spare room as a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and building a cradle from oak. Brennan's wife, who lived in town, knitted blankets and tiny clothes. The other hands teased Tobias mercilessly about his impending fatherhood, and he took it with good grace, too happy to care. In February, on a cold night when the wind howled around the house, Willa went into labor. Tobias rode through the storm to fetch the doctor, pushing his horse hard through the drifts. By the time they returned, Willa was in the bedroom with Brennan's wife, breathing through contractions. Tobias wanted to stay with her, but the women shooed him out, telling him he would only be in the way. He paced the kitchen for hours, listening to the sounds from upstairs, praying silently to any god who might listen. When the baby's first cry split the air, he nearly collapsed with relief. Brennan's wife came down a few minutes later, smiling. You have a son, a healthy, loud son, and your wife is asking for you. Tobias took the stairs 2 at a time. In the bedroom, Willa sat propped against the pillows, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle. He crossed to her side and looked down at his son Vincent, and felt his heart break open. He is perfect, he whispered. He is ours. Willa looked up at him, her eyes shining. We made him. Tobias reached out a tentative finger and the baby grasped it with his tiny hand. The grip was surprisingly strong. He looked at Willa, then at Vincent, then back at Willa, and he could not find words for what he felt. Thank you, he managed finally. Thank you for this, for everything. We are a family now, Willa said, the 3 of us. A family. The word felt foreign and wonderful on his tongue. He had not had a family in so long. Now he had everything. Spring came again, the 3rd spring since Tobias had arrived at the ranch. Vincent grew quickly, a happy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. The ranch thrived. The herd was the largest it had ever been, and they were hiring more hands to manage it. Willa and Tobias worked side by side, partners in every sense, raising their son and building their life. One afternoon in late April, they stood together in the main pasture, watching the hands brand the season's calves. It was hot work, loud and chaotic, but necessary. Tobias held Vincent, who was fascinated by the cattle, his small hands reaching toward them. We need a new brand, Willa said suddenly. Tobias looked at her. What do you mean? The ranch is not just mine anymore, it is ours. We should have a brand that reflects that, he considered. The current brand was a simple WJ in a circle for Willa Jarrett. What do you suggest? Something that represents both of us, our initials combined. They worked it out together, sketching in the dirt with a stick. The final design was elegant and simple, a W and a Q intertwined, enclosed in a circle. Willa and Tobias, Jarrett and Quinn, bound together. It is perfect, Tobias said. They had the blacksmith in town make the new branding iron, and when it was ready they held a small ceremony. All the hands gathered, and Tobias and Willa together pressed the new brand onto a fence post at the entrance to the ranch. The wood hissed and smoked, and when they pulled the iron away, the mark was clear and strong. The Quinn Jarrett Ranch, Willa said. It is official. Tobias put his arm around her, Vincent nestled between them. He looked at the brand, at the ranch stretching out around them, at his wife and son. A year ago, 2 years ago, he could not have imagined this. He had been a man with no name, no home, no future. Now he had all 3. I never thought I would have this, he said quietly. A place to belong, people to belong to. You have it now, because of you. Willa leaned into him. Because of us, we built this together. That night, after Vincent was asleep and the house was quiet, they sat on the porch and watched the stars. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of new grass. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. It was a peaceful sound, a sound of home. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked. "Giving up the wandering life?" Tobias shook his head. "Never, not for a single moment, even when the work is hard. Especially then. Hard work for something that is yours, that is ours, is not the same as hard work for a stranger. It means something." "What does it mean?" he thought for a moment. "It means I matter. It means what I do has a purpose beyond surviving another day. It means I am building something that will last." He took her hand. "It means I am home." Willa squeezed his fingers. "You are, this is your home as much as it is mine. As much as it is Vincent's." They sat in companionable silence, and Tobias felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. He had spent so many years hollow, going through the motions of life without ever truly living. Now he was fully alive, fully present, and he would never take it for granted. "I love you," he said. "I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. I love you too." Willa turned to him, her green skin warm in the lamplight, her tusks glinting as she smiled. "And I am so glad you stopped here that day. So glad you stayed." "So am I." They went to bed shortly after, checking on Vincent first. He slept peacefully in his cradle, his small chest rising and falling. Tobias stood looking down at his son, marveling once again at the miracle of him. This small person, half him and half Willa, proof of their love and commitment. In their own room, Willa undressed and slipped into bed. Tobias joined her, pulling her close. She fit against him perfectly, her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. "Tomorrow we start branding the calves with the new mark," she murmured sleepily. "I know, it will be a long day, but a good one. Yes, a good one." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The ranch was theirs, the future was theirs, and most importantly, they had each other. Tobias Quinn, who had once been a nameless drifter with nothing to his name, now had everything. And as he drifted into sleep with his wife in his arms and his son sleeping peacefully down the hall, he thought that if his younger self could see him now, he would not believe it. But it was real. All of it was real. The scars on his hands from honest work, the calluses from holding reins and tools, the wedding ring on his finger, the sound of his son's breathing in the next room. The warmth of Willa beside him, solid and real and his. He had stopped running. He had stopped hiding. He had allowed himself to be known, to be loved, to be wanted. And in doing so, he had found what he had been searching for his entire life without even realizing it. He had found home. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for branding. Tobias rose early and went to check the cattle while Willa fed Vincent. When he returned, breakfast was on the table and the house smelled of coffee and bacon. They ate together, the three of them, a family. Outside, the hands were gathering the calves, driving them into the corral. Tobias joined them, and Willa came out a few minutes later with Vincent strapped to her back in a sling. She supervised while Tobias and the others did the hard work, her eyes sharp for any problems. The first calf was brought forward, held down by two of the hands. Tobias heated the new branding iron in the fire until it glowed red. Then, carefully, he pressed it to the calf's hide. The smell of burning hair and flesh filled the air, and the calf bawled, but it was over quickly. When he lifted the iron, the mark was there, the intertwined W and Q, clean and clear. "Perfect," Willa said. They worked through the morning, branding calf after calf. It was hot, dusty work, but there was a satisfaction in seeing the new brand appear again and again. Each mark was a statement. This is ours. This is our future. By midday, they were finished. The calves were released back to the pasture and the hands dispersed to their other tasks. Tobias wiped the sweat from his face and went to where Willa stood by the fence, Vincent dozing against her back. "We did it," he said. "We did." She smiled at him, and he saw pride and love in her face. "The ranch is truly ours now, both of ours." He kissed her, tasting salt and dust and promise. "Thank you." "For what?" "For hiring me that day. For not giving up on me. For protecting my heart when I did not know how to protect it myself." Willa reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle. "You protected mine too. You made me see that I did not have to be strong alone. That partnership did not mean weakness. We protect each other. Always." They stood together in the warm sun, their son asleep between them, their ranch spread out around them. The future stretched ahead, full of work and challenges and joy. But they would face it together, two people who had found each other when they needed it most. Tobias looked at the brand on the nearest fence post, the W and Q intertwined, and he knew that whatever came, he would be all right. He was no longer alone. He was no longer lost. He had Willa, he had Vincent, he had a home and a name and a purpose. He had everything. And as the afternoon light slanted golden across the valley, illuminating the cattle and the grass and the mountains in the distance, Tobias Quinn allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years. He felt complete.